Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the Clallam EDC Coffee with Colleen chat. Colleen is in Olympia today, so I will be running the chat, facilitating it today. My name is Mitch Coons, the communication manager. Today, we are fortunate to be joined by two community leaders, Stephen Pelayo and Jim Haguewood. They are going to be presenting a slide deck they've formulated for us. The presentation is called Port Angeles Analysis, Where We Live and How We Grow. I believe it's pretty data intensive, so I'm looking forward to learning more about the research that they've completed, and I'm gonna let them take the show from here. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we kick off. If you could remain on mute, just so we don't pick up any inadvertent background noise or dogs barking, as Colleen always says. That would be great. And then it is a pretty thorough presentation, so we ask that you keep your questions towards the end, and we'll make sure to get through of them. Should have about 20 minutes, hopefully, at the end for a Q&A session. So without further ado, it's all you guys. Who's presenting first?
It's Steve Pelayo. I'll go first here. Let me share my screen. Okay. Let me make sure you guys are seeing that. Is that coming through?
Looks great.
Okay. All right. So good morning, everyone. Look, the goal today is to look at some big picture data on our community, everything from population growth trends to other demographics, and really take a deeper look at our economic model. Then Jim's going to be going into kind of overlaying how this all fits in today's and tomorrow's housing markets. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a financial analyst. I've been involved in investment banking for 30 years or so. I'm not an expert on housing. I'm not an expert on urban planning or economics, but I do enjoy analyzing data. My wife's family came to Port Angeles 130 years ago. We've owned a home here since 2008. I'm actually on the on a couple boards here, the Waterfront District, working on revitalizing our downtown waterfront and implementing the Elevate PA plan. So that's enough about me. We have 3 objectives today. Let me see if I can get this to turn here. Number 1 is to educate. You know, W. Edwards Deming is credited as saying, "In God we trust. All others must bring data." The bottom line here is that ideology is really important for our core values, but we must emphasize empirical evidence when making decisions. Secondarily, I'm not going to have any solutions for you today. I'm not here to call out anyone. If anything, I want to call in the community so we can have a healthy debate. Obviously, the next phase is going to be about setting goals, developing a strategy. This is what our comprehensive plan drafts are going through right now. I'd love to see more and more people get involved. So really at this point, really the key decisions that we can maybe make today is what should we prioritize? So I want to start with some age demographics for Clallam County. You know, as we know, some lack of economic opportunity for our youth has really led to kind of an exodus and a demographic shift to just an older population. Half our population is over 50 years old. We actually have twice the state average in terms of concentration of people over 60. That's greater than 30%. And in fact, we have more people over 70 years old than we have under 18 years old. This is going to be echoed in some of the data I show you relative to like birth death rates and Port Angeles School District enrollment data that I'll talk about in a little bit. This chart, I know it looks a little busy, but let me walk you through it a little bit here. Maybe I can actually pull up a little laser pointer here to help you a bit. It shows the Clallam County population trends. Okay, this is from the U.S. Census. We have roughly 80,000 people in Clallam County. That's this green line here. It shows relatively steady growth, 0.8% annual growth for Clallam County. Unfortunately, this is notably slower than the state of Washington at around 1.4% annual growth. And it is a bit disappointing because Washington is the 7th fastest growing state. You'd think we'd have a little bit more tailwind, yet we're underperforming. What's notable about this chart and why we need to take a closer look are some of the other lines. This red line here is the death rate. And it's obviously been steadily increasing with the population, maybe even showed a bit of accelerations. At the same time, the blue line is our birth rate. And so you can see it's kind of slightly declining, maybe even accelerating down as well. And that leads to the black line, which is the natural increase. This is the number of births minus the number of deaths. You can see it peaked here in the early 80s. It looks like we had a positive 400 to 500 more births than deaths each year. But then it went negative or so a decade later. By mid 1990s, we're having about 100 more deaths than births in Clallam County, and then it looks like it just even accelerated from there. And today it looks like we have roughly 1,200 deaths, if you will, to 500 or so births. So, it looks like that we kind of have a natural 700 person or so, the black line here, decline in our population. But wait a second, the total population is growing. And if it's growing at 0.8% per year, that's about, I guess that's about 700 people coming to Port Angeles each year. So that's 600 people coming to Port Angeles, but also offsetting 600 that are declining. So we essentially have in-migration of more than 1,000 people, maybe even 1,200, 1,300 people per year is the in-migration into Clallam County. This is really important. It has a lot of ramifications because, let's face it, you're not competing with your friend from high school to buy a home here. You're in fact battling those climate refugees that are migrating here, not just for our beautiful backyard, but because $400,000 to $600,000 homes are actually cheap compared to where most of them are coming from. So just to repeat a little bit of what I said before, City of Port Angeles, COPA is how I abbreviated it throughout the presentation. City of Port Angeles population is growing less than half the growth rate of the county, roughly 0.4%, again, compared to 0.8%. We're up about 9% in total numbers since 2005. This compares to, the state of Washington went from 6.3 million in 2005 to more than 8 million in 2024. So they've grown about 30%. They grew incremental 1.8 million people. And it's a CAGR of 1.4% per year. So we're just meaningfully underperforming. Now, obviously, we know part of the problem is we're landlocked in between the mountains and the sea. But it is interesting to just see some of the data here. Urban growth management is supposed to take place in the city. We're doing opposite. We're seeing significantly faster growth outside of the city limits. Now, this is one of the more shocking data points to me. The U.S. Census in-migration data I showed proves that people are coming to Clallam County. The demographic data shows that we're getting older. But when I put the data together with school enrollment, I start to realize that we're losing families. And the recent Peninsula Daily News article allowed me to update this chart. And so now we know the City of Port Angeles School District enrollments, it's down about 1,260 kids in the last 20 years. We had about 4,500 kids back in 2005 or so, and now we're down to about 3,200 or so. That's 28% lower. That's a negative 1.6% growth rate per year on average. Again, some of this is macroeconomic, slowing birth rates. Some of it's more people are homeschooling. It's that demographic shift that I was talking about before. But just for comparison, Sequim School District has also seen a decline. They had about 2,900 in 2005. They're down to about 2,600. So they lost about 10% or 300 kids. Again, this compares to City of Port Angeles losing 28% or 1,260 kids. So PA lost 4 times as many kids than Sequim, and the rate of decline was roughly 3 times faster. Now, this was the chart that shocked me to my core, and it kind of sent me down the whole rabbit hole on wanting to research my community. This data is from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. It's the real GDP growth. That's that blue line that was tracking in line with the growth rates for the state, the orange line, Washington there, as well as for United States, the country here. We're all kind of growing in line with that. But something happened around 2005. We started to underperform, first Washington, then the nation. And look, by 2017, Jefferson County started to surpass us. So it's interesting that if you look from 2010 to 2020, that's why I labeled this the lost decade, we really were just kind of flattish in real GDP terms. All these other areas, Jefferson's up on that, state's up on that, Washington's up over that decade. We were relatively flat. We know losing the mills started a little bit earlier in this. I think losing that graving dock project was a bit of an inflection point. You can see this blip up here. I think this is the Elwha Dam, brought like 300, 400 million to our community for that. But ultimately, we just didn't have the business backfill. Lack of manufacturing job follow through. This led to kind of the stagnation. Now, area median income or household income is always, moving, and the county is a little bit different than the city. But Jim's going to show you some slides that say for Port Angeles, it's around $61,000. That's a pretty good guesstimate. And here's some data that's from the housing needs assessment draft that's going around. This is for a 10-year period from 2010 to 2020. And you can see our households grew at about 5% over this period. That's about a 0.4% CAGR. So that's in line with the population growth, but we need to take a deeper look. Households that made up 80% or more than who made more than 80% of AMI actually declined by 8%. Households that made less than 80% of AMI over this decade period grew by 23%. Further, if you just look a little bit more detail here, people making less than 30% of AMI grew more than twice as fast as the overall. They grew 12%. The 30 to 80% category was growing at a roughly 30% over this time period, 6 times faster than the overall. Now, Nathan showed this slide at the recent State of the City presentation, and it highlighted new businesses. I'm very proud of all these new businesses too. But again, I want to be honest here. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, healthcare and social services are nearly 40% of the jobs in Port Angeles. And when we add in education, public administration, government, we're over 55%. So the majority of our town relies on tax collections. And when you look at the top employers, in fact, we used to report the top 10 employers in our annual report, but now for some reason we stopped showing it in 2021. But I went ahead and still stuck this table here from the 2021 annual report. It shows 7 out of the top 10, mostly tax funded. We only got 3 of these private companies still around today, but let's just talk about a few of these. OMC is our largest employer. We're down from the 1,600, I think, to around 1,550 employees. The concentration of revenue from Medicare, Medicaid, I believe it's about 84%, where we're reimbursed like 75, 85 cents on the dollar. It's just simply a structurally unsustainable business model. Any company that had a negative 15 to 20% margin on 85% of their business, it's just not sustainable. Headcount's obviously down a little bit since 2021. I'm worried about the coming austerity measures that are only going to make it worse. And I think, they're already looking for a partner. They're saying the risk is, of course, having to cut some services. I'm even nervous that even a partnership may result in some redundancies, even if only an admin, and result in fewer jobs as well. Beyond OMC, look at Westport Marine here. I think that 550 jobs back in 2012. 2021, 275 jobs. I went down and did a tour with them and learned that I think they have about 45 jobs today. And then, of course, we've all heard from Rite Aid and Big Lots and Joann's. I think First Fed had some layoffs last year. So it's just really important right now, given the austerity measures that are happening. We're all nervous about what's going on with the park, NOAA. Some federal layoffs are happening. I think it's going to impact our nonprofit community as well. And I suspect it's actually going to get much worse. Again, this just fits the theme of my presentation here. Trends and consequences, our overdependence on public employment. In fact, Colleen's the one who said in her opening remarks at the EDC Gala that the federal and state governments are no longer the safety net that we've become accustomed to. Those were her words. So I recently added this slide to this presentation because I think it's important that we take a look in the mirror and we, again, be honest with ourselves. These 3 slides appeared in that recent State of the City presentation. I don't think they're dishonest, but I just think it's somewhat misleading a bit in its framing. Over this 20-year period from 2020 to 2000 to 2020, our population grew 8%. I've already showed this is relatively underperforming. Half the growth rate of the county, a third or less than a third of the growth rate of the state. Household income grew 86%. Yeah, that sounds impressive, but again, this equates to about 3% per year. And after inflation, roughly 2.5%. And in fact, I think inflation's even higher than that when you look at food, fuel, healthcare, education, insurance, heck, our property taxes here. I suspect inflation's even higher. And in real terms, maybe we haven't really grown household income much here. The only data point I could find for the state of Washington is that their area median income's up about 5% over this decade period of time. And then the last slide that was shown was that our residential units grew about 10% over this 20-year period. That's 0.5% per year. Our prior housing action plan that we put out in 2019, I think, or 2017, we wanted to build 150 homes per year. For this 20-year period, we were averaging 42. Again, this presentation is really not to criticize anyone. All the data requires some nuance. I simply want us to be intellectually honest, and so we can have a more thoughtful debate and prioritize what's needed. In my opinion, the State of City address didn't really address some critical metrics. The city likes to look at our financials in terms of an annual budget. And then they like to compare how we're performing versus that budget and then how we perform versus last year. And so you can kind of feel this in the tone of Nathan's quote, right? Our revenues have been stable, consistent, so we can provide the services there. He then emphasized property taxes and sales tax collections are our major contributors to the city of Port Angeles financials. In fact, he then showed that when you look within the allocation of our property taxes, they only get about $1.60 out of the $9 here. So roughly a little less than 20% flows into the P&L for the city of Port Angeles. So I really want to take my last couple of slides and look at these two metrics, sales tax and property tax growth and the allocations to the individual cities' P&Ls. But instead of looking at it and patting ourselves on the back for being consistent and stable, I want to benchmark ourselves. This is really the one true objective yardstick. So I went to the Washington State Auditor, and using their database, I pulled up the annual allocation of sales tax and property tax data to individual comparable cities and counties from 2013 to 2023. I chose a sample of cities that were close to 20,000 population, counties that were close to 80,000, ones that were more remote or more touristy. So this gave me a decent sample. In fact, I chose about 10 of the counties of the 39 counties in Washington, including Jefferson, Chelan, Grant, Lewis, Grays Harbor. And then I chose a couple dozen cities, Walla Walla, Pullman, Sequim, Port Orchard, Poulsbo. And so you're going to see all these come up on a chart. And then I examined the compound annual growth rate over time. There's the link at the bottom here if you want to go and look at the financials for any of these entities as well. So, as a reminder, if you're growing your sales tax and you're growing your property tax dollars, then communities can invest and afford more services. Now, remember, property taxes are capped at this 1% annual increase, but total property taxes can actually grow faster when you're building new housing and new parcels are being added to the tax collection rolls. And sales tax, of course, that growth is just a function of the economic activity in our community. The bottom line is, in this chart here, sales tax growth, the average annual growth over this 10-year period, you don't want to be in the bottom left corner, property tax growth over here. So Clallam County, a little over 2.25%, it looks like, for property tax growth per year on average for this 10-year period. Sales tax growth about 8%. That sounds okay by itself, but then you start looking at other counties and you realize that, no, we're relatively underperforming when we benchmark against others. Let's take a look at it from a city perspective. The city of Port Angeles has had the slowest sales tax growth. Again, this is the red line here. The slowest sales tax growth from 2013 to 2023. Again, because we didn't build much housing, our property tax collections, at least the allocation that went to the city of PA financials, also grew at a much slower rate. Look at Sequim out here in Poulsbo and Port Orchard. All these guys are growing property tax growth and sales tax growth 2 to 3 times faster than the city of Port Angeles. Again, this is back to the whole theme of the presentation, trends and consequences. What do we think this chart's going to look like in another 5-10 years when Sequim adds 500 to 1,000 homes? They're adding apartments all the way up to $600,000-$700,000 homes, and city of Port Angeles seems to be leaning more into focusing on ADUs. I'm going to let Jim, he's the expert on housing, talk more about that. But as a financial analyst, I like apples to apples comparisons. I really think it's important that we benchmark ourselves. So I said, well, wait a second, let's take one more look at it on a per capita basis. Maybe some of these other places are just growing their population so much faster. And so on a per citizen or per resident perspective, maybe it is about the same. Well, that's actually not true. So the city of Port Angeles sales tax collection is about $260. Again, this is the portion that's allocated to the city of PA's own financials there. It's about $260 per resident. This is roughly half the $530 per resident that gets allocated to the city of Sequim income statement. Again, we didn't really want any big box retailers in Port Angeles in order to protect our small businesses, but now Sequim is leveraging these Home Depot, Costco sales tax to really invest in their future. And now you can see, our sales tax per capita is 40 to 45% lower than Port Orchard and Port Poulsbo. It's 20 to 25% lower than places like Aberdeen and Ellensburg. Last slide for me, what about on a property tax perspective? Port Angeles gets about $250 per resident. Again, the portion that's allocated to the city income statement, that is twice the level per resident than Forks and Snohomish, but we are 17% higher than Sequim, 30 to 40% higher than Port Orchard and Aberdeen and Ellensburg. Again, you get a hint to what the economic model most communities rely on. The differences are pretty stark. Let's just do a quick comparison of these two data points. Sequim got about $530 in sales tax per resident, $215 in property tax. So they get about $750 per citizen on property tax and sales tax. Port Angeles got about $250 in each of those metrics, so about $500 per citizen. So the bottom line is PA is collecting about 30% less per person, while Squim's relying more on economic activity. Port Angeles is relying a little bit more on property tax collections. And because we don't have housing growth, we can't spread that over more people, and so more individuals have to pay. And of course, you all know this is just the part that's being allocated to the city of Port Angeles financials. When you add in all the other levies, our schools, obviously the dollar amount per person is going to be a lot more. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to turn it over to Jim. He can talk about housing and what's really affordable and how we're currently allocating our future housing plans. Jim, let me hand it over to you. You're on mute, Jim, by the way.
Thank you. I'm there now. Okay. Everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So what I'd like to start out with, first of all, is to get a benchmark and establish what we define as affordable housing in our economy. And affordable housing is a factor of income and a factor of cost. So this is the, let me do what Stephen did here. So, where am I at? I'll get rid of that. So, so this is the county's median household income in 2023. Port Angeles's median household income 2023. The assumption is that you allocate 30% of that towards your housing costs.
Powering on. Welcome to Alltech Lansing.
Who's that?
Sorry
Okay.
about that.
So in Port Angeles particularly, that allocation says that our economy can budget about $1,500 per month. The county's a little bit bigger at $1,700 a month. And this is, if you take that and try to allocate that to a $400,000 home, 20% down, 7% interest, that's going to cost about $2,100 a month and requiring about $85,000 in income versus these at the $60,000 level income. And this is, again, a factor of income in relation to cost of housing, and we'll get into cost of construction and new housing also, but this is what homes cost in our area. So keep those numbers in mind, the 1,500 here and the 2,000 there. So just for comparison, so I compared Port Angeles, these two zip codes, versus Squim's one zip code to sort of take a look. What does the current housing stock look like? Quite a few more houses in the Port Angeles area. The median year built was 1968 versus 1991. In Squim, 50% of the homes in these two zip codes were built before 1970. Whereas in Squim, 50% of the homes were built after 1990. So there's a 20-year differential in housing stock in our area between Port Angeles and Squim. And again, I think that drives some of the decisions and then strategies that we put into place in regards to housing. Built after 2000, only 12% of the homes were built after 2000, whereas in Squim it was 36.5% of those homes were built after 2000. And then we have this rental occupied, we have a very high number of rental occupied units in these two zip codes in Port Angeles versus Squim and versus the state. These are just some numbers that I updated since our presentation at the PABA. This is a common comparison or mix of housing, both active listings, active median price listings, number of properties sold. About 2/3 tend to be in that 98362 or 98382 zip code. Median house is higher than our area, so that is not unusual. That's pretty common in our area. This is the slide that I used at the March 4th presentation at PABA to sort of give you a sense of what the new home product looks like in Port Angeles and Squim. So these were the 4 samples that I used of new homes on the market in Port Angeles and what the prices are. So this is 1,000 square foot manufactured home on a 7,000 square foot lot in Port Angeles, $335. And that's a pretty good price. I've seen some of them higher for a product like that. We've got some pre-sales going on over on 10th Street at 529, 530,000. There's a couple of townhouses up in the reserve at Valley Creek coming in at the 429, 439 range. Then this home at 1411 Discovery Loop that Kelly Johnson had listed was on the market then on March 4th. It has sold for $530,000. So again, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,460 square feet. Again, this is new homes on the market today. Then looking at Sequim, so this is a product that you can get in Sequim, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,400 square feet with an $840 a month fee at Lavender Meadows. This one now is pending at $429,900. This home, which was a McCrary home on Gaskin Place, $524,500, 2-bedroom, 2-bath. A lot of 2-bedroom, 2-bath homes in Sequim, 1,400 square feet. That's sold since March 4th, sold for $524,500. So sold at full price. This is an example of the homes on Rolling Hills, which is up on 7th Avenue. So this product ranges from about $550,000 to $685,000 in these different products that they're going to put on the market. And that is just a starting point. If you're familiar with those kinds of housing projects, they'll bring you in and you get to pick finishes and other alterations you may want to make to the house. So chances are your home is going to be more expensive than that. But again, these are ranging from $550, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,400 square feet to 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2,200 square feet up in the $685 range. So again, a little bit higher in Sequim, but again, that is new product on the market today. As Stephen spoke about earlier, we are in the process of the comprehensive plan update, and as a part of that, the state House Bill 1220 required that counties and cities project housing need by income brackets for this update of the Growth Management Act. And they have, it's required to use what's called the Housing for All planning tool, which basically estimates or predicts and projects what our economy is going to look like in regards to incomes, in regards to population, and by housing demand for those categories over the next 20 years. So this is what they're projecting, and this came from the county. They're projecting a population growth of about 7,220. That's about an 8% growth over 20 years. 5,200 housing units countywide. So that city of Port Angeles, Sequim, Forks, and unincorporated Clallam County. This is how that separates out in the county's estimation of that. So 1,600 homes in Port Angeles, 1,500 homes in Sequim over the next 20 years. And recently, we had a comprehensive plan stakeholder meeting yesterday. Port Angeles has come out with slightly different numbers. They're suggesting a Port Angeles population growth of 3,943 and in the need for 1,924 homes over the next 20 years. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. So by comparison, some people may think, well, what is that growth rate? How does that compare? Well, here's the differential in growth rate in Clallam County over this 23-year period of time. So since 2000, we've grown by about 13,000 in population and 8,000 in housing units. So I would submit that these numbers are pretty conservative, and they're probably not going to cause extreme hardship to our area in regards to what we think our population growth is and housing need into the future, or particularly the next 20 years. So as I mentioned, the Housing for All planning tool estimates and predicts your economy and what your housing need is going to be. And this is what it's predicting for the city of Port Angeles in the next 20 years. So these are the standard income brackets, 0 to 30% of AMI, 30-50, all the way up to 120 plus. So what they're estimating, and again, this is a reflection of them observing where they think our economy is going. So this is a need of 1,924 permanent supportive housing units. There's a 344 permanent supportive housing units, 200 emergency housing units, for a total of 2,468. But I focused on these housing units. Of that, 76% that they're estimating are going to be under 50% of AMI. So 50% of AMI can afford right now $770 a month at a 30% allocation for housing costs. That prediction of our economy is a little disturbing to me. And that's what we're talking about today. But that's and how we plan for that, or if that's the direction we want to go. But that's what the state is suggesting that we plan for and address in the future. So back to the number of housing units to be built. Let's say we're at 1,924 in the county, and we're looking at 5,200 over the next 20 years in the county. Port Angeles over 2019 to 2024 built about 182 single family housing units, a total of 308 units over that period of time. In SQUIM, single family units built about 252 units and 344 units overall during that same period of time. Again, Port Angeles 182 and 308, SQUIM 252, 344. And as Stephen mentioned earlier, Clallam County, outside of the incorporated UGA urban areas, we've had 607 single family homes built. And again, this is the data I got is 1 year short on this, but this is 607 units of single family houses and a total of 868 units over that period of time. So the trend has been people are building in the county outside of the urban growth areas. So what has the trend been, or what is our planning and our strategies moving forward between Port Angeles and SQUIM particularly, the two major urban growth areas in our area? So Port Angeles, they've been investing and doing a good job to increase capacity of the existing wastewater system. We saw the project down on Marine Drive and up Hill Street up to A Street. They have incentivized infill and multifamily housing through all of these products: ADUs, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, cottage homes, multifamily, townhouses, permanent supportive housing. That has been the predominant focus of housing development in Port Angeles, including permit-ready plans. Port Angeles has done a lot of work in incentivizing this type of housing development. At the same time, there was an increase in permit fees for single-family residences by about 85%, but they are also improving the permitting process and working hard at that. But the point I'm trying to make here is this is the housing stock that Port Angeles has prioritized. Those are primarily rental properties. Those are not many of them are not owner-occupied single-family homes in our area. SQUIM, in comparison, has done extensions to their domestic water and wastewater system to open up new land for housing. They're going to put in a new sewer pump station, a new water station to open up additional land capacity, and they've prioritized single-family housing development in their area. They did reduce some impact fees. They did allow some multifamily and residential zones, but primarily they are pursuing and opening up land for single-family owner-occupied housing units. So this just came in hot off the press from the meeting yesterday. So sort of a comparison of what does our land base look like in Port Angeles and Sequim, and what's happening. Well, this is Port Angeles, and for many people, this is what we call the Western UGA. So this is outside the current city limits, but it's inside the urban growth area. So it's available for urban development, but it's not inside the city limits yet. This is what's called the Eastern UGA. Again, outside of the current city limits, but inside of the urban growth boundary. And you can see where those areas are primarily where a lot of the open land base is. And I forgot, this map is showing us three types of land base. First of all, vacant land is this dark gray color. Partially used land, so there's probably some kind of a house or some kind of a building. It's being used, but there is open space in it, is this pink color. And then what they define as redevelopable land. So that's a parcel where the asset value of whatever's on that land is probably less than the true market value, and it has a potential for redevelopment. So you see in Port Angeles a vast majority of what they're considering redevelopable land. But the point here is that's already got a physical, or there is a use already going on in that property. How'd that happen? So that gives you a sense. So about 35% of Port Angeles is vacant acres inside the city limits, and about 28% of these areas are vacant property inside of the UGAs. So that's what's happening in Port Angeles, and you see a lack of large parcels primarily available that are not in the urban growth areas and not within the city, other than these areas right here. So what's happening in Sequim? In Sequim, currently, there are 13 single-family home subdivisions, either under permit or under construction in Sequim. This is over 900 units in these 13 subdivisions that are taking place, and that's not even counting the potential for 500 to 600 lots at the Seabrook development at John Wayne Marina. So, and this focus here, these are primarily, again, single family on-lot homes, owner-occupied units within these developments. So a little different path to the future than Port Angeles. So what I'd like to compare now on this slide is what is the difference between owner-occupied single-family homes versus rental-occupied housing. So this table is showing us three different things. First of all, it compares income rates for Port Angeles in general, Port Angeles owner-occupied, Port Angeles renter-occupied county in the state, and then a comparison of 2010 to 2022. So you see there the growth in income over that period of time. This number up here is a reflection of the percentage of the state income level here, median household income level. So Port Angeles generally right now is 66%, but what this shows you is, back to our point, we are declining in median household income versus the state over this period of time. So 68 to 66, Port Angeles owner-occupied even went from 95 to 81% of the state average. Renter-occupied units went down a little bit less. Clallam County as a whole went down by 4%. So we are not, as Stephen was showing you, keeping up with income levels in our county. The other key point here is that renter-occupied units typically are much lower median household income levels than single-family owner-occupied units. So back to my point, where Port Angeles is pursuing this style of housing, Sequim is pursuing this style of housing. So what is the benefit of single-family home ownership in a community? So on the top left, we have an example of what is the economic impact of building single-family homes. And if you take a look at the an owner cost of about, $522,000, the revenues left for the community is about $300,000 in the building process and materials during construction. About $94,000 in tax benefits during that process, but an ongoing about $20,000 in state and local government benefits from a single family home. Individually, people benefit greatly from single family home ownership. They appreciate wealth. They receive tax benefits. It's very predictable. They know what their monthly cost is going to be, and they do appreciate and value. And as I said before, this is concerning that in Port Angeles, we have a much lower owner-occupied home ownership versus Sequim versus the state and the county. We're at 56%, again, 44% rental occupied units. So again, I think that reflects into that income levels that we have in Port Angeles. So some conclusions, and I'll go through a few of these, and then I'll let Stephen take a few of these. But our conclusion is economic growth must be priority number one, and particularly in regards to increase in median household incomes, increase in wage employment income levels. Income is a factor in our community. We are not keeping pace, and it reflects into all aspects of our community. But we're also saying that we must keep this in balance in with people and people that live here, public versus private jobs, and particularly in housing. We need to balance between the smaller ADU rental occupied units versus single family home ownership. And to do that, we've got to make significant improvements in the quality of life characteristics in our community to make this a place for younger families, demographic to come and want to live here. And we must embrace this immigration, particularly of a younger demographic and family. So Stephen, why don't you take employment there?
Sure. Obviously, the heavy reliance on tax-funded jobs is coming back to bite us now, especially with these austerity measures. So we need a reprivatization going on, and hopefully towards more higher earning jobs. If we can't build the manufacturing companies here, let's embrace the remote worker. I remember Colleen said that she did a survey at one point, I think 8% of respondents. I'm sure it's even higher than that today. Let's get these remote workers here. Let's sell them on our backyard. Let's let them bring their private insurance. Hopefully that'll make our number one employer, OMC, profitable again. But certainly we need to get those people into our community. From an education side, I just saw Susie Ames yesterday speak. It's great what's going on at Peninsula College. She's got that, I think we peaked at 2,000 students there, troughed at 1,000. We're back to 1,700. She's doing an excellent job there. We have a lot more work to do within Port Angeles School District from an enrollment, but I am excited. I'm optimistic that we have a bunch of upgrades coming, almost $300 million worth to education. We got to make sure we leverage that. We got to make sure we get some families coming back into our community. Again, I'm a little bit nervous that we're not going to have families moving into all these ADUs that we're building in Port Angeles. Jim, you take housing. You're the housing expert.
Yeah. So again, we're suggesting that we need a balance, and as you saw from the presentation, I think our counties are getting a little bit out of balance because families and high wage earners desire single-family homes on lots. And that's what's happening in Sequim. It's not happening in Port Angeles. And we need to balance that out for the benefit of the entire communities. And as Stephen said, ADUs are not for families. So if we want families to move here, and particularly remote workers with families, we need to build single family homes on lots where they have some space. We're saying economically to leverage these prime assets, including the new foreign trade zone, Main Street in Port Angeles and other areas to help redevelop the commercial districts. In regards to real estate, there needs to be an emphasis on revitalizing and repurposing commercial real estate. At the same time, build new residential and remodel old. Those should be equally incentivized for people to invest and remodel their existing residential properties. Infrastructure needs to be extended into the UGAs to the curb for properties, and particularly large underserved parcels. That's what's happening in Sequim. That's what needs to happen in Port Angeles to open up land base for new development to occur. And back to my first slide, which is affordability is a factor of income and cost. So we need to acknowledge that homes cost a certain amount of money to build. There's material costs, there's labor costs, there's permit fees, all of these things together. That's what it costs to build it, and we must acknowledge that at the same time, but we should be focusing on how do we improve our economy, improve the earning potential of the residents that live here. That's what helps affordability. And then lastly is to improve and maintain efficiency and predictability in the permitting process. So with that, let's have some questions.
You know, Jim, I'm going to add one more in there. Let's also improve kind of our culture of transparency, accountability. Let's drive some specific KPIs, not ideologies, in reducing that bureaucracy. You know, let's really focus on that. I stood up at City Council and said, I wish I could declare a state of emergency for the Port Angeles economy here. I want to create this sense of urgency on everyone, whether it's at the City Council or city staff, that we are in a tough spot right now, and we're going to have to hunker down, especially during this increased austerity measure. So let's work as a community to get through this and really put together a vibrant future for our town. That's it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for the presentation. You weren't kidding. It was definitely data heavy, which is good. I was looking at the HUD numbers earlier this week, and generally speaking, you're completely right. I mean, our county is becoming older and older. I was seeing even a third of the people in our county are at retirement age, which obviously skews the numbers already with them being higher income earners. And then just kind of recap what the EDC is focused on is raising the income levels of working age population, particularly in the private sector. And that was echoed in Colleen's remarks at our annual EDC gala. I did recently put those remarks on YouTube if anyone's interested in looking at that after the presentation. But yeah, we got about 10 minutes. Let's go ahead and open it up to questions. Looks like Dale's got his hand raised.
Thank you. Really helpful presentation. I have a question that I'll proceed with a comment. My folks lived in near Bentonville, Arkansas for 28 years, which was a really sleepy community. And in the last 10 years, one of the Walton families from the Walmarts decided that they were going to work with the community to turn Bentonville into the mountain biking capital of the world. And if you go and look at the community there, what you'll see is an amazing economic engine that was created by some really out-of-the-box thinking. I think the problems that we're dealing with in our communities need much greater solutions than what we've been cooking up. And my question is there anybody in the community that's coming together to think about some out-of-the-box solutions that are on the scale of what's happening in Bentonville?
Jim, do you want to start there? Or?
I'm not sure that is happening at this point. Not that I'm aware of. You know, there's some unique characteristics, and this came up at the Port Angeles Comprehensive Plan stakeholder meetings yesterday. And we need to recognize, in the context of developing strategies to try to solve some of these issues, we need to recognize that we live on an island. And so I think the way in which we approach solutions or changes to our economy must recognize the basic fundamental facts that we live in, particularly in regards to geography. I think there's a lot of positives to that, and but there are some challenges to that. But I am not aware of a group of people that are in the process of thinking in those ways.
Well, let me add at least a little bit color to this. I mean, I see Paul Jarkowitz on the line here. Paul and Caleb at the port. I love what you guys are doing, leveraging the port properties there, whether it's at the airport or down in the waterfront. So we are really looking to you guys to help drive some of that economic development. Susie at the college, we got to give her credit for what she's doing. The Downtown Waterfront District Board and you know, getting us affiliate in this Main Street USA program that has helped revitalize a lot of historic districts for some other towns across our community. And really, this Elevate PA plan has 64 very specific targeted things. I'm hoping you're noticing things a little cleaner downtown. Flower baskets are coming back. The welcoming vista view. You know, please come out. The Big Spruce cleanup is the first week of May. Please come out and help our community as well. You know, I think you saw the investment. Obviously, we had a big donation for Field Hall. That's been huge. We saw the community rally for things like the Dream Park and the pump track. So I think there are little circles of things that are going on. We just need to kind of get them starting to touch and overlap a little bit more. So I am positive that there are people working. Sometimes it's easy to get depressed looking at my charts all the time, but again, there are some people that are working behind the scenes that are trying to rally for a vibrant future for our community.
Absolutely. And on that note, Mike French commented that he'd say that recompete is out of the box solution with that 35 million coming in the community for workforce development. Right along those lines. So we got a few more questions or a few more hands up. I believe Lindsay was next, and then we'll go Tim Dalton after that.
Hey, sorry, I'm driving. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Yes.
go ahead.
All right. So I want to go back to affordability. It's a measure. It's, you know, affordable housing is 30% of housing costs divided by income. Researchers who've looked at how do you address a housing crisis that's based on shortage of housing have found that increasing income doesn't address the problem, because housing costs actually increase faster than the increases in income. You can increase income by, say, 1%, housing cost goes up by something like 2%. And that makes sense if we think of it in kind of a game theory sense, where if you have 100 families and 95 housing units, raising the income of the families who don't have housing or any of those families isn't going to produce 5 more housing units. And the solution when it's a housing crisis based on shortage is to expand the stock of housing, specifically the stock of inexpensive housing. And I appreciate the slide that said we need a lot more housing for families under $750 per month housing costs. I'm curious kind of what solutions we have here, because I think we're hearing the solution is increased income, but the research says that's not going to solve a housing crisis situation. So I'd like to hear more. Thanks.
I mean, I'll guess I'll start a little bit, and then Jim, you talk specific to housing. From an economic perspective, you know, the last 20 years, the wage growth in Clallam County has been roughly half the growth rate of the state average. So this relative underperformance is really what put us into this position. And unfortunately, we didn't take advantage of low interest rates and lower inflation rates to be building what the future housing that we needed, the multifamily housing. So that kind of set us up for this. So I kind of go back to a first principles approach. We're finding ourselves having to deal and put, you know, band-aids on all the symptoms of our problems. But I think the root cause of the problem is that our economy has just relatively underperformed. Now we're going to try to address these, and I absolutely agree. And so remember, the key theme across our presentation is balance. I just want to make sure we don't swing the pendulum too far one way or the other way. it scares me when I see things like the U.S. Department of Commerce saying that we should have 80% of homes for people making less than 50% of AMI, and in fact they only want us to build 12 homes over the next 20 years for people making more than 120% of AMI. I think we need balance, and so I want balance across all things: housing, public, jobs. Jim, maybe you can talk a little bit more about housing in general.
Well, first of all, fundamentally, I believe that this model, if it's a reflection of where the state believes our economy is going, then I would argue it's an economic discussion more than a housing discussion. And so this I don't buy this as, and I don't accept it, that that's where we're going and we have to plan for that. I'm not supportive in regards to housing to plan to build houses at this level, and that should be our priority. I think that is a flawed philosophy, particularly when our neighbor to the east is building a completely different product. And people will be attracted to that product. So I don't, and I talked to Ben Broderick about this yesterday, I don't agree with this, and I don't believe we should plan in this regard. I think that's flawed, and it's not sustainable for Port Angeles as a city.
Yeah, even at the SQUIM Sunrise Rotary meeting, the engineers spoke a little bit about their plans relative to the U.S. Department of Commerce recommendations for allocations, and they just said clearly we're not following those. So we're looking at very, very differences. I keep saying the tale of two cities here, and it's going to be quite different if PA, we only had building permits for 12 single-family homes last year, down 50%, at the same time that SQUIM's building 500 to 1,000. That's really going to be a very different future. I just want to advocate for balance. That's all.
So it is 9 o'clock. I mean, we might have time for one more question if you guys are okay with that.
Sure.
All right, go ahead, Tim. I think you're up.
Tim, you're muted.
National Home Association of Home Builders came out this morning and said 50% of the country can't afford a home over $300,000 with where things are. When you're looking at the 30% of or of what your housing supply should be, that's on a gross basis. But when you take that down to a net basis, people are paying 50 to 60% of their monthly income on housing stock. When you're looking at these numbers here, the slide that you have up, one of the areas that you're looking at is this 80 to 120. For an individual, you're talking 51,000 to about 72,000. For a family of four, you're in about a $78,000 to $110,000 neighborhood. And we don't have the housing stock. I mean, the people can't afford. SQUIM's building $500,000 homes that your workforce can't afford. I mean, it's one of the biggest concerns with SQUIM businesses is the fact that their workers can't afford to live there. And Washington state energy codes, the working toward 2030, the energy requirements and everything else, Washington is hammering, housing. They want affordable housing, but they're coming in with the energy requirements. And then now rent control, because like say, a lot of the houses and the housing stock that are going to be built are as rentals. That's where our workforce is going to be. And it's kind of, I see, one of the problems that we have up here is that if people can't see a vision for home ownership here, they're not going to stay here. They're going to go somewhere where they can see a vision for home ownership and economic viability. And I think those are two of the, like I say, Jim and Steve, you guys both have the point right that our future housing and economic development go hand in hand. And that's what we have to be working on, are those joint solutions for our workforce housing. A very good presentation. Thank you for the data.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I look across our community and I just wish we had, a couple hundred unit multifamily apartments. That would certainly help. It just doesn't pencil out in this kind of economic environment with interest rates and inflation costs where we're at. I look at some of our empty lots across our community, even in along the major corridors. So hopefully that means we have infrastructure, sewer and power along there. So why can't we have downstairs retail with upstairs multifamily? Again, the math just doesn't pencil out for that. So we're definitely in a tough spot across the entire country, not just in our own community.
Absolutely. Looks like we do have one more question. Do you have time, or do you guys got to scoot
Yeah.
out? I don't really budgeted for
I'm
an hour.
okay. Go ahead, James.
Go ahead, James.
You're muted.
Yeah, so I appreciate you guys' presentation. I heard a lot of references to the meeting that happened yesterday. What concerned me about the maps I saw yesterday was that it viewed Port Angeles as being the same size as it is now, and not incorporating in the urban growth boundaries. And so then, we go arterials. Well, Lordson on the west side wasn't identified as arterial, but if you go and incorporate all those lands to the south of the airport, then that becomes an arterial. I don't really have questions for you because, we've talked so much already. But I just appreciate all the hard work you guys did. I'll leave it at that.
Great, thanks, James. And I would encourage everybody to get involved. This comprehensive plan that's going on right now, this is our chance. I'm hopeful that we will use this time to not only be thoughtful in putting together a plan, but then we will actually execute on that plan. When I go back and I look at the, like our housing action plan that we put together, whatever that was 5-10 years ago, we didn't really execute. I maybe give us kind of a C- grade against that plan. So just as much in the planning stage that we're in now, I'm also hopeful that we will do a better job in executing it going forward.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for joining us so much. I mean, you could tell just by the turnout and participation, it's a very important topic in our area. If John just asked how to contact, would you guys be willing to have follow-up questions down the road?
Yeah. If anybody
Sure.
wants any of my slides, they can email me. I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat right now. Or if you just want to give me a call or find out a way, I'd love to have them sit down and have a cup of coffee. I met with the people at Platypus and Westport. I'd love to meet more industry leaders in our town, learn more about marine and timber guys as well. So yeah, I'd love to engage with anybody in our community.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for your time. This recording will be up on our YouTube channel later today. And I hope everybody has a great day. Thanks again.
All right,
Thank
Mitchell.
you.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Appreciate it.